Dimness had settled in the intensive care unit. The approaching morning was windless and slightly misty, indicative of good weather to come. The ward's walls hadn't yet reached their full brightness and appeared grey rather than dazzling white. A medical device stood in the far corner, and its rhythmic beeping was synchronized with the monitor's zigzagging display. The man lying on the bed was breathing so faintly it was almost imperceptible. Gradually, Ronald Sanders started to regain consciousness. It felt like emerging from the realm of Morpheus, which had held him captive longer than usual this time. His index finger twitched weakly before falling limp as he attempted to raise his hand. "At this rate, you won't be leaving your bed any time soon," Ronald thought to himself, a touch of irony in his mental voice. Ronald regained consciousness not immediately and lay for a couple of hours in a mixed state. He could hear everything around him, yet couldn't open his eyes to understand where he was. Along with the sensor beeping, a sharp, slightly unpleasant smell was one of the first sensations to reach him, causing discomfort. "Where am I? Why can't I see anything? There's the smell of chlorine and something else. Am I already in the afterlife?" For some inexplicable reason, the man wasn't afraid. After all, what's there to fear when everything has already happened? The morning was gradually dawning, and Ronald discerned this from the unfamiliar voices to his left, primarily female and quite resonant. "You go to the 5th ward. Check what's going on there," a voice echoed. "Okay, I'll be right back. I just need to grab the medicine list," came the prompt response. Ronald felt a surge of alarm. "Medicine list? 5th ward? Am I in a hospital?" he guessed. The beeping of medical monitors, the scent of disinfectants, and the conversations between nurses and orderlies all indicated he was in a hospital room. However, Ronald had no recollection of how he ended up here. His mind and body still felt groggy, as if wrapped in cotton wool, beyond his control. Suddenly he was overcome with a powerful thirst. His throat was parched, yet he was unable to signal that he was conscious. "I hope somebody comes to me soon, or I might die of dehydration," he thought. He had just mustered the strength to signal when the ward door opened, ushering in a wave of fresh air and expensive perfume. The sound of several steps, a mix of high heels and the swish of shoe covers, indicated at least 2 people. The businessman, Ronald, was surprised, but externally his face remained serene. "Mrs. Sanders, the doctor said visits are only after rounds, yet you're here so early," an unknown woman addressed Ronald's wife. "Listen, darling, he's my husband, and I decide when to visit him. I'll sort it out with Dr. Bennett. Don't worry. Please leave us alone for a few minutes," replied Brienne. "Well, why should I leave? Mr. Sanders is unconscious anyway," objected the nurse or orderly. Brienne's voice took on a threatening tone. "That's none of your business, dear. Go and give injections, administer drips, clean floors, whatever your job is, and I'll handle my husband myself." After a moment of heavy silence in the ward, the door closed, indicating the medical worker's departure. The silence was soon broken by the clomping of Brienne's heels, which felt like a needle piercing the immobile businessman's heart. Ronald could feel his wife's intense, evaluating gaze on him. "Why are you lying down? This is not a resort for you. Hand over the will, and that's it. You should have written a will for me first, and only then go into a coma for 2 months." Brienne sneered. Taken aback, Ronald began to sweat, his cheeks aflame and forehead damp. 2 months? What does she mean? Is this a joke or what? Or is this her way of shaking me up? Ronald pondered. What his wife said next made him rethink his opinion of her entirely. "You're lying here like a vegetable and the business is idle. Who's going to look after your hotels? I've asked you many times. Write a power of attorney. Make a will. We can't predict what's going to happen. However, you're so stubborn. But don't worry, honey. Kyle and I will sort it out in no time." Brienne's words made him nauseous. His pulse quickened, and his heart throbbed in panic. God, what is she talking about? Has she been possessed? A frantic thought raced through his mind. Suddenly, his breathing grew laboured, his lungs failing him, his vision blurred, and his consciousness began to slip into cold darkness. Simultaneously, the room filled with the urgent beeping of sensors, alerting the medical staff that something was wrong. The last thing Ronald heard was a stern voice, not tolerating any objection. "Why are there outsiders here? I told you not to let anyone into the ward until the rounds. Yet you've arranged for visitors." Brienne huffed indignantly. "What did I do wrong? I wanted what was best for him. I came to visit my beloved husband, and you're all here like fighting dogs. Why is everything beeping? If anything happens to my husband, I'll sue you." However, the female doctor swiftly ushered the unanticipated guest out of the room and instructed the nurse to prepare a defibrillator and an adrenaline injection. Every second was precious. "A shock! A shock! One more time!" Nothing. "One more time!" Brienne didn't see any of this. She briskly left the clinic and headed for her car, parked at the entrance. In her haste, she kicked a janitor's bucket, scattering the collected trash across the asphalt. "Why did you leave it in the hallway? Couldn't you find a better place? I almost tripped," she complained. "Hey, lady, what do you think you're doing?" the elderly man asked unhappily. Ignoring his remark, Brienne rudely pushed the janitor away when he tried to help her. From the kick to the unfortunate bucket, she managed to break her heel and had to hop her way to the car. The janitor sighed, shook his head reproachfully, and resumed his garbage collection. A medium-sized dog with fiery red hair, noticeable from afar, lingered around him. Charlie behaved calmly, not wanting to upset his new master. Previously, his owner was a half-blind retired schoolteacher who relied on the dog as a guide. Charlie learned to guide his owner to the store or the park when the leash was put on. Those were good times. However, a month ago, the owner died from a sudden and unpredictable heart attack. He had no time to call an ambulance and collapsed on the floor. Charlie didn't panic. He broke the window with his paws and jumped out. He ran to the neighbour's house, howling so loudly and pitifully that they understood the situation without words. Although the ambulance arrived quickly, the paramedics were unable to save the former teacher. Charlie chased after the ambulance that took his master away, following it to the hospital. A few days later, janitor Henry noticed him there. By this point, Charlie was noticeably limping. He had injured his paws on broken glass. The wounds had become inflamed, and in his pain, the poor dog tried to lick them for relief. Henry immediately understood the situation. He loaded the dog onto a cart and, ignoring the surprised glances of passers-by, took him to the vet. Charlie was fortunate. If Henry hadn't taken him to the vet any later, it would have been too late. From that point on, they began their life together. Charlie and the elderly janitor with a complicated past. Some suggested he had a criminal record, while others speculated that Henry was simply a homeless man who had decided to find stability due to his age. The truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in between. Henry was reticent about his past, providing elusive responses whenever clinic staff asked about it. After 2 months on the job, his true identity still remained a mystery for everyone. After seeing off with his eyes the wealthy young woman, Henry winked at Charlie, saying, "There has been justice, my friend. I've encountered such women in my life many times. They're like parasites, clinging to someone and never letting go until their victims' deaths." Charlie looked at him attentively and barked softly, careful not to attract the chief doctor's attention and cause trouble for the janitor. Henry smiled and patted the dog on the back of his neck. His workload was relatively light that day. After all, it was springtime, In the fall, during the golden leaf drop, janitors work relentlessly, often to the point of exhaustion and joint pain. But at this time of the year, things were easier, as long as one wasn't lazy and maintained order. Suddenly, Charlie perked his ears and turned his head towards the gate. Henry knew the busiest time was about to start. It was allowed time for people to visit their relatives in the wards. Some were rushing to surgery department, others to neurology or therapy. All were eager to visit a loved one battling a relentless disease. Typically, Charlie remained calm and didn't react to the visitors, but this time he became visibly excited and even wagged his tail. Henry turned around and was taken aback. Approaching him on the narrow walkway was an unusual couple. A thin, short woman and a boy of about 7 years old holding her hand. A mother and son, Henry thought, smiling. The boy held a balloon in his hands that persistently attempted to break free, only to be stopped by the resistance of a thin string held by its young owner. The boy wore a bright yellow jacket with a hood, and he looked like a little chick with skinny legs and wing-like hands. His mother was dressed more modestly, and her attire evoked nothing but pity in Henry. A worn, light coat, a lilac beret, a simple skirt and low-heeled shoes. Upon seeing a red dog a dozen meters away, the boy immediately ran to hug it. The boy's mother exchanged a questioning glance with Henry, but he simply nodded. "Don't worry, Charlie won't bite anyone, especially a child." The woman visibly relaxed and approached Henry, asking, "Good morning. Can you tell me where the emergency room is?" Henry readily pointed to a nearby building. "See that building with the blue roof? That's it." "Ah, I see. Do you know if they allow us to enter?" Her question seemed rather odd to Henry. "Well, they won't kick you out, of course, but they most likely won't let you enter the ward. You know, people are on the verge of life and death in there." The strange woman nodded, then shifted her gaze to her son, who was already busily playing with Charlie. "Tony, be careful, okay? You'll get your jacket all muddy. Are you going to the hospital with me, or will you stay in the yard?" "You go ahead. I'll look after the boy. Don't worry about Charlie. He's a sensible dog. He won't cause any trouble. I guarantee it," Henry offered with a smile. The woman's face lit up. "Oh, thank you very much. My name is Evelyn, and this is Tony." "And I'm Henry," the man replied with a respectful nod. "Cool, Mum. You go, and I'll take a little walk with the dog. Everything will be fine with me here," said the boy with an ingratiating smile. Evelyn agreed with such a plan and went towards the hospital, although she felt uncomfortable as she approached the intensive care unit. Where am I even going, and what will I say? Who am I to Ronald? A friend? Subordinate? Or just an acquaintance from the street? Evelyn thought as she entered the hall. Before she could take a few steps, a nurse on duty immediately approached her. "Hello, and who are you here to see?" Evelyn was visibly embarrassed, but it was too late to back out. "Good day, I'm here to see Ronald Sanders." The nurse shook her head disapprovingly. "No, you can't see him right now. He suffered a cardiac arrest half an hour ago, brought back from the brink. All of this happened after a woman, claiming to be his wife, visited. I let her in out of kindness, only to be reprimanded by the head of the department, so a visit is out of the question." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes. A cardiac arrest? But he was admitted after a robbery. What does a heart attack have to do with it? Just then the head of the department entered the hall. Seeing Evelyn's distress, he paused to explain. "Try not to worry too much. Mr. Sanders' health is quite good. However, a head injury is serious, and the effects can be permanent. For instance, he woke from a coma this morning only for his heart to fail minutes later. But we managed. So for now, go home and try not to dwell on this. By the way, who are you to Mr. Sanders?" Embarrassed, Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I'm a colleague, more precisely an employee. I work as a maid at one of his hotels." The doctor nodded, indicating the conversation had concluded. Evelyn hesitated briefly before approaching the on-duty nurse to ask, "Where do the windows in Ronald's room face?" "They overlook the courtyard, where the janitor is currently sweeping," the nurse replied readily. Evelyn thanked her and headed for the exit. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, radiating a warm, spring-like feel. The air was comfortably cool, not causing any discomfort or sweat. Evelyn loved spring, a season of dreams, unfulfilled hopes, magic, and an easy sense of love that resonates with those young at heart. "Mum, how's Uncle Ronald?" Tony asked. "He's improving slowly, Sonny. The doctor is confident he'll recover," Evelyn replied. A sweet smile spread across Tony's face. Evelyn gave her son a mysterious look before whispering something in his ear. As she spoke, Tony's happiness seemed to grow. Throughout this time, Henry stood aside, observing his new acquaintances. Charlie was willing to follow little Tony to the ends of the earth. Henry had heard about dogs' affection for children, but he had not imagined it could be to this extent. Meanwhile, Evelyn took a balloon from her son's hands and tied it to a tree branch directly opposite the hospital ward windows. "When Ronald wakes up and sees the balloon, his mood will improve," Evelyn explained, noting the janitor's surprised look. The janitor nodded respectfully and started regarding the boy's mother with even more respect. The elderly man silently wished that each sick patient's relative would tie a balloon to the tree. He imagined how it would transform the yard and perhaps even encourage the patients towards recovery and discharge. Yet he chose not to voice these thoughts, not wishing to embarrass Evelyn. After a moment of thought, Henry said, "If you need any help, or if you're having housing issues, feel free to reach out to me. I live nearby, 512 Main Street, apartment 39. "Thank you very much. I'll keep you in mind," Evelyn said with a smile. Taking Tony's hand, they walked down the path leading to the exit. The janitor stood watching them for a long time, a small boy in a yellow jacket with a hood, and his petite mother, shivering with each gust of wind. "Well, Charlie, the fun's over. Time to get down to work," Henry whispered with a smile, giving the dog a pat on the back of its neck. The dog looked resentfully at his master, but there was nothing it could do. Such was the dog's fate, to wait, guard, and love. What else could it do? Meanwhile, in Ward number 5, Ronald Sanders finally regained consciousness. Of course, standing up or moving his limbs was out of the question. "How can I move when I nearly died?" And all because of Brienne and her confession. She said it as if she had stabbed me in the heart and injected poison into my bloodstream. How could it be? 4 years together and then this. Does she really hate me that much? But why? Ronald didn't know the answer to this question. He never gave his spouse any reason for doubt. Yes, he often had business trips, but that was part of the job. His work involved managing some hotels throughout the city and region, ensuring that the furniture, repairs and conditions were up to standard. Otherwise, clients would choose other accommodations. Ronald took his business seriously. He managed a chain of hotels called Crown Hall. Each establishment featured a restaurant on the first floor, where the image of a crown was prominent, from the napkins on the tables to the aprons of the waitstaff. He respected all the staff members, from the doormen and chefs with impeccable reputations to the ordinary kitchen workers. However, his wife Brienne often treated his subordinates poorly and made personnel adjustments that negatively impacted the overall profits of the hotels. She would belittle the waitstaff and criticize the chef, despite her lack of knowledge in haute cuisine. Once a chef even said to her, "Mrs. Sanders, forgive me for being blunt, but I wouldn't trust you to make an omelette." Ronald managed to defuse the situation with a joke. However, Brienne seemed to hold a grudge. This was apparent from the bright spots that appeared on her well-groomed face, a reaction Ronald had witnessed more than once, though he always tried not to draw attention to it. The situation remained relatively calm until Ronald employed Evelyn and her young son Tony at one of the hotels. They had met a month ago, under unusual circumstances. In early March, The weather was still chilly, and city dwellers sought shelter from the biting wind. Despite the calendar declaring winter over, the cold was still reaching out to those unfortunate enough to be outdoors. While passers-by had to bundle up in jackets, Ronald, comfortably seated in his luxurious SUV, felt no discomfort from the weather. After work, as was his routine, he parked his vehicle at the supermarket and shopped for groceries. Ronald had to do this almost daily, as he couldn't depend on Brienne's skills in this aspect. She was unable to cook, and any attempts often ended with the need for a fire extinguisher or a call to the fire department. Occasionally, when Ronald was not in the mood to cook, he would order delivery from his restaurant or ask the chef to prepare something special. However, today he didn't want to burden the chef with another request. Instead, he opted to buy groceries and cook for his wife. Stepping out of his warm car, Ronald noticed a frail woman with a child, around 6 to 7 years old. It was difficult to tell the child's exact age due to his worn, shapeless jacket that made him resemble a mannequin from afar. Observing the woman, Ronald thought, "So young, and already with a child, and I've been telling my Brienne so many times to give birth to my heir, but she doesn't care. Only beauty salons and restaurants are on her mind." Suddenly, Ronald felt a wave of pity for the woman, shivering in the cold wind with her son, while the world around her carried on indifferently. It was evident to anyone that the woman was facing some difficulties. A pang of pain hit Ronald's heart. He couldn't help but notice the boy sitting quietly next to her, not crying, but just staring intently at one spot. Many believe that great wealth corrupts the soul, making one indifferent to others' suffering. Yet Ronald's example contradicts this statement. Approaching, he asked, "Hello? It seems you're having some difficulties. Can I help?" The stranger, embarrassed, lowered her eyes. She didn't say a word, just sighed sadly. Perhaps she's shy, Ronald thought, then added, "Don't worry, speak up. I genuinely want to help you and your boy. What's your name, young man?" The child looked warily at the businessman, bracing for a trick, then said, "Tony." "And I'm Ronald. Nice to meet you." Ronald responded with a smile. Despite herself, the woman also smiled and quietly introduced herself. "And I'm Evelyn Bogard." Ronald, trying not to emphasize her problems, said, "Listen, aren't you job hunting? Would you consider working for me as a maid or a dishwasher? We're short a few people at the hotel. What do you think?" Taken aback by the man's proposition, Evelyn hesitated and couldn't provide a clear response. Seeing her hesitation, Ronald encouraged her. "Don't be scared. I'm being honest. I don't mean to offend you. Besides, do I look like a scoundrel? I can see you need help, and I can offer you a job and money. What do you think, Evelyn?" She responded with a resigned gesture. "Yes, I agree. You don't seem like a maniac." Ronald laughed. "No, I have no ties with criminals. My business is legal. A few hotels in the city and surrounding area. You've likely noticed the crown symbol on some buildings. That's all my place is. Everything is legal and clear. Even the tax authorities have no complaints against me." Evelyn examined him closely and discerned that this stranger meant her no harm. His face was too open and kind to possess any malice. "If you agree, why not get in the car? You're catching a chill in this wind. It might look like spring, but winter is still holding on," Ronald offered with a smile, gesturing towards his SUV. Tony's eyes lit up. "Wow, may I sit behind the wheel, or at least honk the horn? So the boys on the street can see. They'll be jealous." Ronald smiled. "Of course, why not? Stay in the car while I run to the store. We're a bit out of stock. You're sleeping over at my house tonight, and tomorrow I'll show you the hotel. You'll be able to work and live there." Evelyn glanced doubtfully at the dark blue car, then realized there was nothing to lose. She had accepted this hospitable offer. When her son got up from the bench, Ronald noticed his noticeable limp. Noticing the man's gaze, Evelyn explained, "He's had this since early childhood. One leg is a bit shorter than the other. That's why he needs corrective shoes, which are quite costly. You know, the ones with orthopedic insoles. Tony used to have a pair, but he outgrew them. Now he makes do with what's available. I've tried to put inside cardboard, but it doesn't really help. You can see the result." Ronald nodded in understanding. "All right, get into the car and I'll be right back." Evelyn opened the massive door of the SUV with great difficulty and sat down in the passenger seat in the back. Meanwhile, little Tony climbed up front, eager to examine the dashboard that reminded him of a spaceship's interior. There was even an embedded screen playing a movie. His eyes widened in surprise, and he clapped his hands with joy. Ronald rushed to the supermarket, planning to buy twice the usual amount of food. After all, along with him and Brienne, 2 more guests were joining their evening meal. Navigating the shopping aisles, he picked out items he thought the boy and his mother might enjoy. He was familiar with Brienne's preferences, but knew that regardless of his purchases today, she would likely be dissatisfied. Whether she was on a meat-free diet or trying to gain weight, her demands often varied, so it was quite difficult to content her. However, Ronald had grown used to his wife's whims, as they had been married for more than a year. He was raised in a working-class family without a father, and he was a humble man who never aspired to greatness. From a young age he was independent. His grandmother recalls that at 7 years old, Ronald could easily prepare himself a simple lunch or breakfast, consisting of fried eggs or mashed potatoes. This independence likely contributed to his success in business. Ronald met Brienne, a vibrant brunette with raven-coloured hair, at a corporate party attended by the city's high society. While Ronald typically disliked such events, his status obligated him to attend. It was at this party that Brienne approached him, offering a flirtatious smile and inviting him to dance. The usually cautious Ronald was immediately captivated by her. Their courtship period passed quickly, and it was clear to all who knew them that a wedding was imminent. The news of Brienne's pregnancy ultimately prompted Ronald to decide to marry. "Can you believe I'm on 4th week? We're having a baby, honey. Our baby. I wonder what kind of eyes he'll have. Like yours, brown, or like mine, green," Brienne said with a smile. Overwhelmed with love for his partner, Ronald proposed to her that very evening. Unfortunately, their joy was short-lived. A month later, Brienne miscarried, while Ronald was away on a business trip. On the fateful evening, she had decided to cook a delicious dinner, but lacking cooking skills, she spent too long at the stove, became dizzy, and fainted. Somehow, she managed to call an ambulance. Brienne wasn't sure how she did it. She likely acted automatically or out of sheer willpower. Ever since the incident, Ronald blamed himself daily. He felt he had failed to protect his wife and ensure her safety. Brienne had many times suggested hiring a housekeeper and a maid, but he had always refused, insisting they could manage on their own. Truthfully, Ronald was slightly uncomfortable with his wealth and was against the idea of having a servant. In his view as a young businessman, it seemed outdated, a throwback to the times of czars and landlords. Of course, there was nothing inherently wrong with it, but Brienne's ordeal forever changed his life and hers. After they lost their baby, Brienne seemed like a different person. She began spending more time at beauty salons, restaurants, and during Ronald's business trips, she visited clubs in the company of her friends. Ronald didn't mind Brienne enjoying herself, but sometimes it was too much. Once, he returned from a business trip earlier than expected and found that Brienne was not home. Holding a bouquet of roses, he suddenly felt foolish and discarded it. "Like a scene from a cheap movie. All I wanted was to make her feel good," Ronald muttered, a bitterness lacing his words. The situation was as old as time itself. Many would have suspected adultery, but he didn't jump to conclusions. He called his wife, and it turned out she was visiting her best friend, who easily confirmed her words, which finally dispelled his doubt. Despite the whispers among his hotel and restaurant staff about his wife's infidelity, Ronald chose to ignore them. His business partners only shook their heads. Whether Brienne was deceiving Ronald or not, it didn't concern them as long as he fulfilled his obligations. Being a man of action, Ronald was always expanding his business empire. While this unsettled some, they couldn't compete with the growing popularity of his hotel chain. At some point, Brienne decided to join the family business and began to make her own changes in certain processes. She bought inexpensive clothes on sale and, disguised as an unassuming customer, visited her husband's hotels. Of course, service in Ronald's hotels did not depend on the wealth of the client, because Ronald demanded from the staff that even if a homeless man with money came to their places, he should be served no worse than the mayor of the city. But Brienne had her own plan. Hiding her appearance behind a layer of makeup and a wig, she watched the doormen, waitresses, dishwashers, and discreetly made notes in her notebook, noting those who needed to be fired in the near future. The personnel changes didn't take long. In the Crown Hall hotels began to mass dismissal of maids, and waiters were afraid of customers, expecting in every second to see Brienne's spy. Ronald tried to discuss the situation with his wife, but their conversations often ended in arguments. Brienne insisted that she was making necessary changes that Ronald, in her opinion, was too naive to see. "They're taking advantage of you," she'd say. "The waitresses, the cleaning staff, they're making a fortune at your expense. We'll put a stop to this, and you'll be a millionaire." Ronald shook his head. "Brienne, you shouldn't be so adamant. I believe in living and letting live. If you keep being tough on the staff, they may not serve customers well. Instead of constantly checking on my people, why don't you try working a shift at one of the restaurants or hotels? Then you'll understand the reality." "No way. It's not a good idea for the wife of the owner of this business to serve the customers. I'd better replace all the employees and get what I want. You'll see. Soon we'll have a lot of money." Brienne objected. Ronald gave his wife an ironic look, not believing a word she said. As expected, Brienne's predictions never came true. Her interference in the restaurant and hotel business resulted in a severe shortage of good staff, making it incredibly challenging for Ronald to manage. So, when the opportunity to provide Evelyn and her son with a place to live, in exchange for her working at one of his establishments, came up, he gladly took it. He had no plans to charge the young mother for the accommodation. Returning to his SUV with a bag full of groceries, the man saw Evelyn's expression and immediately sensed her anxiety. She must have been fearing the upcoming encounter with his wife. Evelyn, being astute, had noticed the wedding ring on Ronald's right hand, leading her to anticipate a potentially uncomfortable conversation at the businessman's house. Unfortunately, her instincts proved correct that evening. While young Tony remained oblivious due to his age, Evelyn was confronted with an extremely unpleasant situation. Upon seeing Evelyn in her worn-out jacket, Brienne sneered, "Oh, who on earth is this? She must be homeless. Where did you find her, dear? And that boy looks like a street urchin from the highway. They'll probably steal something without even saying thanks to us." Ronald turned pale, but faced his wife defiantly. "Brienne, you shouldn't be so harsh. This is Evelyn Bogard and her son Tony. They will be working for us at the hotel or restaurant." Brienne's face turned crimson with anger. "So, they're also going to work for us? Are you out of your mind? Have you asked if this beggar has the medical papers? She looks like she's covered in diseases. And that kid, what if he's stolen? These beggars, do you know what they do? They take a street child and walk around with him. They trick fools like you for money." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she reached for the doorknob. However, Ronald was firm in his decision. "Evelyn, calm down. I'll handle everything. You go into the living room. Yes, the bathroom is straight ahead and to the left. If you need to, you can take a shower while I prepare dinner." Evelyn nodded forcefully, avoiding eye contact with Brienne. Brienne, on the other hand, felt like a ruler of destiny. She was controlling everything in the house, from approving maid candidates to the selection of hotel services and restaurant menus. As the guests entered the living room, she muttered to Ronald, "You shouldn't have meddled with this beggar. Mark my words, it won't end well. She could easily break into your safe, as you never lock it. You should hire a locksmith to fix it, especially since you store substantial sums of money. Are you just relying on chance?" Ronald raised an eyebrow in surprise. "The safe is broken, you say? How do you know the lock is defective? I haven't told anyone about it." Brienne pursed her lips in resentment, realizing she had made a mistake. In reality, Ronald had known for a while that his wife was gradually taking money from the safe. However, Brienne did it carefully and, judging by the expenses, spent them on entertainment or buying fashionable clothes, which she was just crazy about. Being a shrewd and forward-thinking man, Ronald chose not to confront her, to avoid causing discomfort for either of them. The dinner unfolded in an atmosphere of hostility and undisguised resentment. Seated across from Evelyn, Brienne couldn't help but glare. The restless boy, unable to remain quiet for even a minute, further fueled her irritation. Ronald understood his interest, because he guessed that the boy's childhood was very difficult. The man had long known that all unhappy people were unhappy in their own way, and therefore, as much as possible, he tried to help them and alleviate their mental suffering. He supported orphanages and animal shelters, his contributions extending beyond mere monetary donations. Ronald personally delivered gifts to the children in the orphanages, even dressing up as Santa Claus during Christmas. He shared in their joy as they celebrated the holiday season, dancing around the Christmas tree with them. Ronald routinely inspected and maintained shelters for homeless animals, ensuring they were always clean and comfortable. Despite Ronald's goodwill and kindness, Evelyn found that dinner very stressful. Brienne behaved arrogantly and, after having too much champagne, began hurling insults. Evelyn endured it, understanding her position, and only little Tony looked at Ronald with tears in his eyes, as if asking the kind businessman to stop this black farce. Fortunately, the guests only stayed at Ronald's house for a day before moving to one of his hotels. They were given a double room with all conveniences, including internet, satellite TV, and even a game console that Ronald purchased for Tony at his own expense. Many employees wondered why Ronald was being so generous, effectively giving up a profitable hotel room. However, the reason became clear when Evelyn started working. Ronald had never had a better maid, and likely never would. Evelyn was diligent, cleaning the windowsills until they shone and maintaining the perfect moisture levels for the flowers. She was always courteous and kind, regardless of her personal mood or issues. Unoccupied rooms were always clean, comfortable, and inviting under her care. The difference was noticeable, inspiring the other maids to match her standard of work. Brienne still despised Evelyn and eagerly awaited the moment to get rid of her. The woman had her own loyalists among the hotel and restaurant staff, whom she had personally hired. These employees were ready to defend Brienne, treating Ronald with noticeable disdain. They concealed their contempt in public, but when in a safe environment, they freely criticized their superiors. One such loyalist was Kyle, the hotel administrator. His good looks likely helped him secure his role. Rumours circulated about a passionate affair between him and Brienne, but no one could confirm it. And of course, people just did not want to pry into the matter, fearing they could lose their jobs. It was well known that crossing Brienne was risky, as she held significant influence in Ronald's business and appointed favourites based on her own judgment. On one occasion, Brienne even tried to frame Evelyn by accusing her of stealing a wallet from a client. Evelyn, of course, swore she had never taken anything that didn't belong to her, but Brienne smiled mysteriously and gestured towards her bag hanging in the back room. "Well, do you want to open it yourself, or should I open it?" "No need, I'll do it myself," Evelyn hurriedly announced, her voice trembling as she sought to fulfill Brienne's request. Sure that she was innocent, she opened her bag and was stunned. Inside, among her other belongings, was the stolen wallet. The poor maid felt a wave of discomfort and dizziness and fainted. "Look at the scene she's causing. You shouldn't be working in a hotel, dear, but in a theatre. A sold-out show would be guaranteed." Brienne scoffed. The situation was escalating quickly, but despite the fact that all the evidence was against Evelyn, Brienne did not take into account one thing. It turned out that her husband had a video recording from the internal security camera. The young businessman had kept the camera's capabilities a secret from the staff, intending to use it as strong evidence in case of a dispute. It was then that it was revealed that Brienne had planted the unfortunate wallet in Evelyn's bag, aiming to discredit the undesired maid in front of Ronald. Later that day, the couple had an argument in Ronald's office. "You know what, Brienne? This is too much. I expected anything and everything from you, but not this. I believe we should break up and start preparing for a divorce." Brienne pursed her lips resentfully and glared at her husband. "Divorce, you say? Break up? Fine. I don't mind splitting up, but remember, I'm legally entitled to half of your business. After all, I am your wife, a legally wedded one at that." Ronald's eyes sparkled with a mysterious gleam. "That's where you're mistaken, Brienne. While you were busy with your affairs and plotting to fire Evelyn, I consulted a notary and drafted a will. If I were to die prematurely, or whatever, everything goes to my parents. They may be old, but they can handle it, and in the event of a divorce, you'll get nothing. Did you forget how you insisted I draw up a prenup? You didn't even realize what you were signing." At the mention of the inheritance and the prenuptial agreement, Brienne's face immediately changed. A few minutes later, in a soft, repentant voice reminiscent of a schoolgirl, she asked, "And the will? Have you already had it notarized?" Ronald shook his head. The businessman's anger gradually faded, and the thought of divorce no longer seemed so urgent. "No, I haven't had time, Brienne, but I'll do it one of these days. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I know many things. You lied to me about the miscarriage. You weren't pregnant. I found out right after I went to the emergency room, and they told me that they never had no patient with your name. But I tolerated it. I thought you'd improve. I was waiting for you to become sensible and have a baby, but you're only creating obstacles for yourself." Tears glistened in Brienne's eyes. "Ronald, I'm sorry, you're right. I should have come to my senses a long time ago. Can you forgive me, dear? I overacted with Evelyn, and her son too. You only wanted what's best for him. You had him checked by an orthopedist. Massages, therapies, special shoes. He doesn't even limp now. But forgive me, I was a little jealous. And all this was because I love you very much. And I was afraid of losing you." Unfortunately, Ronald heeded her words and delayed his visit to the notary for another time. And a day after their conversation, he was found in an alley 3 meters from his car with a head injury. The main theory was robbery, a common occurrence that led wealthy individuals to hire personal guards. But Ronald always relied on his own strength and was confident he could handle any situation. And now, lying in a hospital bed, he realized his mistake. Unfortunately, Ronald did not know the most important thing. While he was being treated at the clinic, Brienne waited 2 months and kicked Evelyn and her son out of the hotel room where they were staying. "And I don't want you to set foot here again. If I see you, you'll be dead," she said maliciously. Ironically, it was the same day Evelyn visited the emergency room. She and Tony were left wandering the streets, not knowing where to go. At that moment, Tony suddenly remembered the janitor's suggestion. "Mum, can we go to Henry and Charlie? He suggested it, and, in general, he's such a nice man. Smart. I had a good time with him. He's like a grandfather." Evelyn looked at her son with surprise and said, "Yes, we can try. Of course, it's inconvenient since we were just suggested this today. But we have been evicted from our hotel, so we have no choice. We can't spend the night on the street. Let's try staying at Henry's." The elderly man was delighted to welcome his new friends back. He served them dinner, offered them his room, and settled himself in the living room, where he laid a mattress on the floor. Henry, unaccustomed to such conditions, was an experienced man who had seen a lot and kept a secret known to almost no one. However, he had no intention of revealing his hand before the right time, and patiently waited for the next day. In the morning, after preparing a quick breakfast, Henry suggested that Evelyn and Tony visit the businessman who had nearly suffered a cardiac arrest the previous day. Mother and son looked at each other in surprise. They didn't quite understand why the kind old man had suddenly decided to visit someone he barely knew. Henry only smiled enigmatically, saying, "Don't worry, I'll explain everything to you, but later, okay?" Surprised, Evelyn nodded. After she and Tony stepped into the hallway, the elderly man pulled out a miniature walkie-talkie from his pocket, quietly commanding, "Everyone, get ready. The operation is nearing its final phase." His words were so odd that even Charlie's ears perked up. Within half an hour, Henry was in the intensive care unit's hall, where police had detained Brienne and her lover Kyle. The criminal duo had syringes filled with a toxic liquid, which they intended to surreptitiously administer to Ronald. Still not understanding what was going on, Evelyn looked at the janitor as he sharply threw off his cloak, underneath which was a perfectly fitting police uniform. "Forgive me, but this was a special circumstance," Henry said. "Ronald certainly doesn't know it, but he's not a stranger to me. In fact, I'm his biological father. His mother and I separated over 35 years ago. I moved to another city, graduated from the academy, and dedicated my life to serving law. I only discovered Ronald was my son 6 months ago, and since then I've been keeping an eye on him, as much as I can. I never imagined Ronald's wife's lover would try to kill him. So, when I learned about the threat to my son's life, I took a janitorial job to be closer to him and to monitor his surroundings." Brienne, handcuffed, glared at Henry. "You're a scoundrel. You purposely put that bucket in my path, causing me to break my heel. Did you not?" Henry grinned. "Of course I did it on purpose, dearie. I needed to plant a wiretap in your pocket to learn about your plans with Kyle. You had no sympathy for my son. You wanted his inheritance. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Now, Brienne, you'll never be near my Ronald again. As for Evelyn and Tony, I hope they'll become constant figures in his life, because they truly love my son and care about his well-being." At that moment, Evelyn felt as if everything happening to her was just a dream. She thought to herself, "No, this can't be how it happens." On that day, the entire hospital learned about the outstanding transformation of the janitor. As is often the case, Ronald was one of the last to find out, after the doctors finally allowed him to have visitors. Seeing a uniformed man walk into his room, the businessman grew noticeably anxious. "I'm sorry, son. I should have told you sooner, but I feared I would be a burden or hinder you. When I learned you were in danger, I felt compelled to step in," whispered Henry, swiftly brushing away a tear. Ronald smiled and touched the shoulder of his father, whom he had never met before in his life. A minute later the ward door opened, and Tony, along with Evelyn, appeared on the threshold. The boy held a red balloon, while its twin floated on a tree in the hospital yard. Henry smiled before addressing his son. "I hope you respect my fatherly advice, son. My guidance to you is this. Always keep them close to you, and care for them like they're the apple of your eye. It's likely you're unaware that Evelyn has a secret. Tony is not her son, but her nephew, who was orphaned in an accident that took his older sister's life." At that moment, Ronald gave Evelyn such a tender look that could say without words many things. However, it was only a little later, 6 months to be exact, when he verbally expressed his feelings and proposed to Evelyn, and soon the retired police officer danced at his son's wedding and celebrated the most significant victory of his life.